This one is titled, Am I the a-hole for expecting my husband to get a vasectomy? My husband and I have been together for almost 10 years and have 4 kids. Our youngest is 6 months old and my pregnancy was high risk and birth was extremely traumatic with a long hospital and NICU stay. He kept putting off the conversation about getting a vasectomy, but I thought that he'd eventually do it when things got less hectic. He recently told me that he wouldn't and it wasn't up for discussion. Am I the a-hole for being upset about it? Editing to add context, I was planning to get my tubes tied after our last baby and I was okay with that, but because I was hemorrhaging after the C-section and suffer with a bleeding disorder, it wasn't possible, and I would have to be put under for the procedure due to other health issues. So yes, I guess I just expected that the next best and safest thing would be for him to get a vasectomy. I would never force him to do anything that he didn't want to do, but I am upset that he would rather me risk my life than him to have a much simpler procedure done. My body has never tolerated hormonal birth control, and we've always done the calendar and pull-out method, and it's worked so far, but it's only so effective and another pregnancy could be life-threatening for me. So I don't want to risk it. It was assumed by both of us that I would have my tubes tied until the complications occurred, so I'm hurt that he won't do this to prevent me from having to be put under again to have this procedure done. Now, I think that she adds a lot of context around that to try and make herself seem a little bit better, to try and make her request and her perspective and her assumption that he should get a vasectomy not quite as terrible as it is at face value. Honestly, I don't think that any of that context makes it all that much better. Fundamentally, I do believe that men have a right to decide what happens with their bodies, just as much as, in this type of case anyway, as much as a woman should have the right to decide what happens with her tubes, for example. Fundamentally, like, I personally am not the biggest fan of permanent birth control methods in general, but that's a personal choice. I understand that for other people, that's a medical decision that they feel like they want to make for themselves. However, a vasectomy is intended to be permanent birth control. I know that some people will argue vasectomies can be reversed and in some cases it works out, so it's not really quite that permanent. And I know that also other people will argue it's a really small, tiny thing and doesn't really matter for the man. I actually think it's a pretty big deal. Like, if the outcome is that you cannot have kids, you have now made the choice that you will not be able to have children for the rest of your life. And obviously in the case of this marriage, that may well be the case. You're not going to have children for the rest of your life, but it is possible. There's always this chance for me that something happens in the future that makes you regret that choice. And I have read stories even on this forum of people who make that choice to get permanent birth control done. And then, 5 years later, they would really love to have the opportunity to have another child, and then they decide not to. So no, I actually don't think, for men, for example, there's also the chance that this marriage falls apart for whatever reason, and then they have had a vasectomy for the sake of a wife who didn't want to have kids anymore, but it's that decision impacts only them for the rest of their life. And that's pretty horrifying. Fundamentally, I don't think that anyone, even within the context of a marriage, can decide for the other person, you should have this done. I think that that's pretty cruel. I understand that she has a bunch of health complications and getting tubal litigation done is maybe like a problem for her. I think that there are by far enough birth control methods out there that they can use instead without her having to force him or wanting him to go through a permanent procedure. So yes, there's this really ironic part of it when she says he kept putting off the conversation about getting a vasectomy, but I thought that he'd eventually do it when things got less hectic. Sounds to me like he was really like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I really don't want to do this. And then she kept insisting, kept bringing it up until eventually he was like, I'm not going to do that. And I think that's fair enough. I honestly believe that that this is a personal choice and it should be a personal choice. I do actually, that said, because maybe this sounds a little bit contradictory for some people, I do actually think that it is very cruel if someone decides to get a vasectomy or to get the tubal ligation done without talking to their partner. Because there you are making, again, a decision that impacts both of you equally and you're making it as an individual. And so while I don't think that you can force people to change something about their bodies, I also think that it is really cruel and really unfair to have someone in a marriage with someone else and to make the decision unilaterally by yourself that you do not want to have children. That is a decision that I think needs to be made by the couple. Maybe that's a little bit hypocritical in some ways. To me, it makes perfect sense. Like, I would not be okay with my husband making his own decision with regards to no more kids without me being involved in that at all. But I also wouldn't expect him to do this kind of thing either. So some of the comments here, this person says, yes, you are the a-hole. You assumed it was something that he wanted, and it's clearly not. It's not your body, and though getting your tubes tied is more invasive, if you're that set on not having any more kids due to your issues, then you need to be the one to take the next step, and he can do his part and wear condoms. Exactly. Like, it's really quite simple. If this is something that is so major to you, that the risk of it is so high to you, and you're not happy to go with any other forms of birth control instead, then you kind of have to bite the bullet there yourself. Next person says, you have the right to be upset, and you are not an a-hole for feeling that way. You feel disappointed that he won't undergo a change with his body like you had to. If he doesn't want to do it, though, you can't force him, and you need to think of a different plan. I got my tubes removed 6 months after having my third baby. My husband said that he would get a vasectomy, but he has crippling anxiety in hospitals. He's a mess. It's hard to get him there, and he passes out and overthinks everything and just goes into a panic. Plus, I can't be on birth control because I just bleed. I got my tubes removed, and it was a super easy and fast surgery. I was walking 2.5 miles 24 hours later. I was working a 12-hour shift 3 days after. Now, I always find it hilarious when people make these kinds of personal anecdotes. They share these personal anecdotes as though they are there to help the person come to terms with the idea of getting her tubes tied. And to me, they never sound quite so convincing. You may be one of those lucky people who has a really easy recovery. Other people might not have an easy recovery. So I would just never share my personal experience and be like, well, yeah, you see how easy it was. That's why you should get it done. I think this statement, you feel disappointed that he won't undergo a change with his body like you had to due to your pregnancy. This is one of those things where if you spend your whole life railing against the fact that there are biological differences between men and women, and that pregnancy and childbirth and just being a mother is a lot more physically, biologically taxing on the female body than it is on men, then I kind of feel like it's kind of your own fault. You need to get a little bit over it. Yes, maybe it's not fair that there are differences between men and women, but that's just reality. That's just the way that the world is. When you make the choice and you make the decision to have kids, then you should make that with the understanding that that will change your body in some kind of ways. And no, you can't expect your partner or wish or hope that your partner would go through a similar change physically as well. Like, that's not, this comparison here is a little bit mind-boggling to me. It seems to me that it has to come from a place of slight self-delusion where you just can't accept that there are differences between men and women. This one is pretty interesting. She says, would you be upset if he was trying to push you towards something you didn't want? If he doesn't want it done, then talk about what other measures you can both do to prevent more pregnancies. And another person replies, yeah, but men expect women to go on birth control or get their tubes tied all the time. A lot of times it's a more passive expectation, but it's still an expectation. And then the first person still replies to that one. She says, right, but that makes us women resentful because we don't want it expected of us, just like her husband doesn't want it expected of him. That's why I said they need to communicate what other options they can agree on. One cannot demand another to do something that they don't want. If that's the case here, they have bigger problems. So there is always, I don't know what it is about these types of topics, but there's always a sense of like men versus women. And I don't know, maybe it's some element of generalizing, it's just shoving the whole groups together. And so in the context, even though technically speaking, this is just one couple, right? It's just one wife with her husband and the decision that they want to make amongst each other. But then obviously everyone else comes in, they project their own circumstances, their own experiences towards it. And then on top of that, they shove and lump all men into one big group and all women into one big group. And then they're like, well, if men get to expect it from women, then she should get to expect it from him as well. And now you're going so many layers above what the original issue was and what the person wanted help with, that you're not going to get anywhere. It's definitely not a good way of dealing with it. Another comment that I wanted to pick up on from this case, this person says, so unpopular opinion here, but after 4 kids, yes, I'd expect him to do his part by getting a vasectomy. All these women suggesting that you should get your tubes tied or removed obviously don't understand how a vasectomy is compared to that. To me, this sounds a little bit evil. I would expect you can only harbor this sense of resentment towards men for not going through pregnancy if you are just deluded, if you're just in denial about the real life state of affairs. This is just reality. It is actually kind of a superpower that only women have access to. And then, yes, okay, it might have some negative consequences. It might have some other risks. It might have some other impact on their bodies that they don't like. This is all the case. Like there's some positive, there's a lot of positive actually. You get a baby out of it, and then there's some negative as well. But fundamentally, that's just the role of the woman. That cannot be usurped by the man, unfortunately, but it just can't. And you can wish and hope and pray as much as you like. You can have this expectation, which I think is a really terrible expectation, but you can have this expectation that he needs to suffer physically as well to make things equal. That's not right. That's not right. You just were born a woman, and you'll be a much happier woman if you accept that means that you have different abilities, different skills when it comes to birth and pregnancy. That's just not going to be done by a man. One person does take offense at this, and she says, my husband does his part by taking care of me during our pregnancy so I can rest and be healthy, and taking care of our kids alongside me when they are born. And another one replies to her. She says, I have had 3 children and I would never expect my husband to get a vasectomy because of that. I also chose to have the children. I did extensive research on both getting my tubes removed and him getting a vasectomy. Yes, I agree. It's so much easier for a man to get a vasectomy, but it's still his choice. My husband approached me before I really even started thinking about having the discussion on what we wanted to do, as we were both sure we were done after the birth of our 3rd child. He decided that he wanted to get a vasectomy without me even starting the conversation. I did tell him, though, that if I had to, for some reason, get a C-section, I would get my tubes removed at the same time. I didn't have a C-section, so he went and got the vasectomy. If we do not want anyone dictating anything to us as women about our reproductive health, we need to extend the same courtesy to men and their reproductive health. I think OP's husband should at least have a conversation with her explaining why he doesn't want to get a vasectomy, though. I disagree with this. Actually, I think that just the reason of I don't want to, it doesn't feel right to me, is a perfectly valid reason, and no one can force you to do any, it's a physical change that you have to undertake to your own body. You can just say, no, it just doesn't feel right to me. I don't want to do it. I don't think that you need to justify it any more than that. I don't think you need to go into, oh, well, maybe it's going to be really painful, or maybe there are these complications. That's like, it's not, you don't need to do any of that. All that said, I think that I appreciate at least that this person has enough self-awareness to be like, yeah, I had 3 pregnancies as well, and I still would never expect my husband to get a vasectomy just for myself. There are a couple of people who back up that original person. They're like, I agree with this. It's the least that he could do, and so on. And then another person, a vasectomy is much less invasive than a tubal for her. There's no way that I would be having penetrative sex with him again until this was sorted. And that's so horrendous and awful. You're saying essentially, like, it's almost blackmail. If you understand that sex is a need, like a physical need for the majority of men, and then you decide that you're going to withhold sex unless someone undergoes a physical procedure that changes their body in a permanent way, then I'm pretty sure everyone can understand why it's a bit coercive, right? It's coercive and it's wrong and it's blackmail. This completely messes me up as a statement. One person does reply to this. She says, yes, a vasectomy is much less invasive in comparison. I really am shocked by how many women will try to force or manipulate their spouses into getting a vasectomy. If it was the other way around and a man said that he would not have penetrative sex with his spouse until she got her tubes tied or removed, every woman on here would completely lose their minds on him. Why is there so many double standards? Why do so many women expect no one to tell them what to do when it comes to our reproductive rights? But when it's a man's reproductive rights, they think that they should have a say and should be able to expect the man to get a vasectomy. And that is a good summary of this in general. I do not think it is right to have this kind of expectation. I think any type of birth control in general should be a group decision, should be something that both of you decide together. And that's pretty much all there is to it. The more you try to coerce, the more you try to force it, the more you try to pretend that there's some kind of equal split between men and women. And if women have to get pregnant, then men have to be the ones that suffer through permanent birth control, then you're going to be sorely disappointed, because that's just not, it's not right.